Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
As the world's eyes follow the Israel-Hamas war, the recent Iran attack, and the repercussions of American campuses and beyond, the need for rigorous reporting and respected journalism has never been more essential. The Forward is the nation's most widely read Jewish news outlet, a fiercely independent and non-ideological source for news, culture, and opinion across the political spectrum. Our guest today, Jodi Rudoren, became editor-in-chief of The Forward in 2019 after more than 2 decades at the New York Times, including a stint as Jerusalem bureau chief. Having personally covered 2 prior Israel-Hamas wars in 2012 and 2014, Rudoren has been a leading commentator since October 7th, appearing on CNN and MSNBC and speaking at numerous college campuses, synagogues, and more. Today, we will hear more about the complexities journalists have faced in reporting on the war abroad and anti-Semitism here in the United States. Moderating the conversation is Andrew Geronimo, director of the First Amendment Clinic at the Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Andrew's teaching and advocacy focuses on civil litigation involving free speech, free press, and frequent speaker and commentator. He is a frequent speaker and commentator about local and national free speech controversies. If you have a question for our speaker, you can text it to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794, and City Club staff will try to work it into the second half of the program. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Jodi Rudoren and Andrew Geronimo.
Thanks for having me. My college classmate Noelle Celeste actually reached out to me in 2019 to invite me to the City Club. I was blown away to hear about the history of this place as a forum, a platform for civil discourse. But I'm glad it worked out for me to be here at this time because it's a great time for this conversation. You know, I'm always not sure how to answer the question of how I got started as a journalist because I kind of really feel like it's more who I am than what I do.
Sure.
Technically, I started when I was 13. I took a journalism class in 9th grade from this remarkable teacher named Helen Smith. And I've pretty much been doing it since then. I thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. I said at a college interview that I wanted to be a lawyer and a senator. And then I went to Yale where everybody wanted to be a lawyer and a senator. And many of them, you know, my freshman year roommate is a federal judge today. So, you know, it works out. Anyway, but I guess what happened was I found that I was filled with questions. I had all these questions about like, you know, why was this way? Why did this person think that thing? And when I found out that you could get paid to ask people questions and explain their answers to other people who might be curious or confused, I was like, that's for me. And so I've pretty much just been doing it since then. Yeah.
Skills of a great lawyer as well, I think. You know, tell us a little bit about the Forward.
The difference is what you do with the information you get in there. You know, no, seriously, they say, like, good lawyers are supposed to not ask a question they don't know the answer to, right? You're never, in court anyway, right?
At certain times,
and
right.
It's the opposite for me and for journalists, right? When I often push back on story ideas when people are pitching them, I'm like, what is the big unexplored question that you don't know the answer to? Because if you're going out with a sense of like, I'm trying to tell a story that comes out this way, and all you do is ask questions that lead you toward this preconceived outcome, which is kind of what you're trying to do, I think. It's like boring, and it's not really journalism. So I want people to ask questions they don't know the answer to that surprises them. And it's also funny, you're well prepared, but I know you're also ready. If I say something, you're going to come up with a new question that follows up, because it's like we want to follow the story where it takes us. Right. And the best interview is the one where you throw away your pre-prepared questions, which works out well for me because I never pre-prepare. But anyway, no, where you're like, the person says something that you really did not expect them to say, and that story, you get out of the interview and you call your editor and you're like, that thing we talked about, forget that. I have a much better story.
As lawyers, we do that on client intake, typically.
Yes, right. This is also back when there was a phone that you held in your hand like that. I don't know. I'm like 100 years old. Right. Anyway, you text your editor now.
So tell us a little bit about the forward and how, maybe how it differs from your experience at the Times, and sort of the unique characteristics of targeting a publication to a Jewish audience, an American Jewish audience.
Yeah, sure. So the forward was founded in 1897, and so it has a similar history to the City Club in a way. It was founded on the Lower East Side. It was founded by Eastern European immigrants. It was a Yiddish language newspaper, and it was socialist. It was a broadsheet, and it was wildly successful. In the 1920s, there were more readers of the Jewish Daily Forward, or then called the Vorwärts in Yiddish, than the New York Times, for like a minute. But anyway, and many Ashkenazi Jews' grandparents or great-grandparents really not only read the forward and relied on it, but it really taught them how to be American. There was a legendary advice column called a Bintelbrief, which is the Yiddish for a bundle of letters. We still publish it today. We've reinvented it a few times. And people asked questions like, should I let my kid play baseball, or will that be too much assimilation? It printed things of like how to vote. And it was also a real community hub. People actually, there was a building on Lower East Side that still stands there now. You can buy a condo for more than $2 million there if you have $2 million lying around. But like Leon Trotsky's bust is in the side, and there's Yiddish writing. And people went to the building to get vaccinated during the flu epidemic of 1919, and they went there to watch the results of elections. So it played a particular role in that community. Who we are today is pretty different from that. We started publishing in English in 1990, which was a little late, I think. And I'm the fourth editor of the English language forward. We do still publish in Yiddish, and we have the Yiddish version of Wordle on our site. So if you're into that, you can play that on our site.
I see them all going for their phones.
Yeah, go for it. And, but most of what we do now is English, and what we are now is we've been all digital since 2019, and we reach about 1.5 million people a month. 1.5 million people a month, that's what I said, right? 1.5 million, yeah. And they're all over the country. We have lots of readers here in Cleveland, and about a third of them are under 35. And what we are trying to do now is not teach Eastern European immigrants how to be Jewish, how to be American, but maybe helping people understand the million different ways there are to be an American Jew today. We are fiercely independent, as Jill said, which means we don't have a political ideology. I like to say our only ideology is the one of inquiry, where we get to ask nosy personal questions of people and explain the answers. And we are one of the only places, we have a very broad-minded opinion section. So we publish the whole full spectrum of opinion. We publish pieces by settlers in the West Bank, and also by leaders of If Not Now, the anti-Zionist organization here, and everything in between, and not just political differences, but identity differences, religious differences, geographic, generational. And so, that's what we're trying to do, is really, before October 7th, I had one answer to this, and now it's a little bit different. But, there's a lot of polling data that suggests that a lot of different kinds of people are very excited to be Jewish, American Jews. But they are not fitting into the necessarily organized Jewish world. They're not, and so we think the Forward is a low barrier to entry way for people to connect to their Jewishness however they define it. So if you're really into Jerry Seinfeld, like that expresses your Judaism, we write about him. There's cultural, there's food, there's politics, there's religion. And in the fall, we actually removed our paywall, so now it's a no barrier to entry. We took down our paywall. It's free to everybody. And, it's very similar. It just because we have, but the point is we think it's really, really important for people to have unbiased, independent, broad-minded information and discourse available to them and to their kids. And so that's what we're trying to do. I know you also asked, how is it different to work at the New York Times and work at the Forward? And it's really, really different in like every way. The New York Times, you have an instant, huge platform, and at the Forward, we struggle to make sure that people see us. At the New York Times, it can be very difficult to make change and innovate and get an idea through the bureaucracy. But once you do, you have like a massive team of people to help you, graphics. And here at the Forward, it's small and scrappy and nonprofit and reader supported, and we can do whatever we want as long as we figure out how to do it. Sure. But the question you asked is the hard part, right? Like, what does it mean to be a news organization for the American Jewish community? And what it doesn't mean is telling people how to think, but it does mean just like giving people a sort of safe space to see things that might be difficult for them to see. This is particularly, I think, since October 7th.
Sure.
We want, we like to say that, I like to say that, we want people to see themselves reflected in our pages, but also challenged by them. And I think particularly since October 7th, it's been very meaningful for American Jews to grapple with the complex issues and feelings that they're having around Israel and about the college campuses and about the left and about politics, to grapple with them in a space that is defined as Jewish and that comes at things from a Jewish lens. Right. I have one more thought about this. Please, I feel like it's a long answer. I'm sorry. But it's like, one of the challenges for me, I write a weekly column and also run the report, obviously. But the question of how much of the report and of my own work should be about Palestinians and from the Palestinian perspective is much more complicated than it was at the New York Times. Like the question of how to balance your coverage over time when you're the Jerusalem bureau chief of the New York Times is one thing. You're trying to cover everything for everybody. I'm committed always to telling the full story of any story and to having a 360-degree view. But so we do, platform the voices of Palestinians, and I have written about Palestinians and Gazans, and one of my, great expertises for this moment is that I've spent a lot of time in Gaza. So it is important to include that in my column, but I've had to think a little bit about like, what does the American Jewish audience need from me right now, right today? And it's been changing every week,
Sure, and I was gonna ask you about this too, in terms of independence of the publication and the views therein, have you at the Forward had to make certain editorial decisions, not just about what to cover, what perspectives to cover, but even about language, right? Language can be ambiguous and interpreted different ways, and certainly a lot of the debates that we see in public discourse and on college campuses and these things are about, what people interpret certain words that folks out there are using and sort of the acceptable boundaries of that. Have you had to make certain editorial decisions along those lines, and have those changed as it's advanced?
Yes.
Are you willing to discuss any of those with us? Yes.
Yeah, so this is a really important topic. I think it was Abraham Joshua Heschel who said, words make worlds. And I certainly believe that as a journalist. My life is all about words and the importance of language. One of the things that kind of shocked me when I first went, oh God, I messed up the microphone. When I first went to Jerusalem for the New York Times, was I sort of started to discover that there was this secret language that I came to call conflict code. And what conflict code is words in the Israeli-Palestinian context that have different meanings than they do in plain English. And I used some of those words accidentally with their English meaning. One of them, for example, was the word disputed. I was writing about a place near Hebron Hebron, as many of you know, is one of the most tense focal points in the West Bank in terms of the fight over who controls what. It's where the Cave of the Patriarchs was, where the Baruch Goldstein massacred 29 Muslims on Purim a number of years ago. So anyway, very contested place. I made the mistake of referring to it as a disputed place. I thought disputed and contested were synonyms. You probably thought so too. It turns out that disputed is a term that people who do not accept that the West Bank is occupied use to describe the West Bank. So it's like a less than occupied idea, that it's disputed territory, not occupied territory. I didn't know that. My article actually used the word occupied also. But I was like, okay, so don't call it disputed. There's a zillion examples of that.
Sure.
And that was 12 years ago, so it's gone on from there. The way I really think about it is I want the broadest possible audience to stay engaged with our work for the most possible paragraphs.
Sure.
Or seconds in this case in radio. So I don't want to use language that makes a person who is on a particular camp is like, oh, I can't listen to that person anymore because they've used a term that I find inaccurate, unfair, racist, anti-Semitic, whatever. So I've tried to, so there's some like defensive editing that you do to sort of strip away those hot button words so that people can hear each other more. It gets complicated, of course, and this has played out a lot in the campus protests because there's a dispute over like what does a certain slogan really mean, and who gets to define what the slogan means? Is it the person who says the slogan or the person who hears it? And I imagine you may have some cases on this upcoming.
Perhaps. And I'm
an addendum to the language thing is like, we do not publish conspiracy theories, and we do not publish racist and anti-Semitic language, mostly. There might be a time when somebody is quoted saying something and there's news value in their offensive speech. But mostly it's like, I'm just trying to, so anyway, trying to defensively edit to keep the audience with you. I often will say when I'm editing, is particularly an opinion story, I will tell the author, I know what you're trying to say, but I also know that this sentence is going to lose the people you want to hear it.
Right.
Sometimes we...
Well, it's an interesting discussion, too, because even as we are now, and you can see these things passing through Congress and things, is an attempt to define, what exactly is anti-Semitic speech. And, there are different competing definitions of those things and how that plays into the discourse. But I feel like there's also almost a parallel between a publication like The Forward and even some academia circles where, I'm going to throw a law term out there. There's a law professor out there at the University of Chicago. Her name is Genevieve Lakier, and she has this term called interpretive uncharity. And the idea is that it's almost human nature that, especially in very charged topics like this, we tend to think the worst of the things that people are saying, whereas if we're in a truth-finding function like the law or academia or journalism, that we should give more charity to the folks who we disagree with and maybe don't interpret their words in the worst possible way. And I wonder, I sort of took that away from the opinion section of The Forward, where you can see instances, for example, there were topics on I'm a Zionist at Columbia. The protesters at Hamilton Hall were a threat to Jewish students like me. Alongside, Jewish students reject claims that campus protests for Palestine have been anti-Semitic. So it does seem like there's at least an attempt to try and bring these two differing positions together. And maybe it's cultural, maybe it's generational, but it seems intentional.
It is totally intentional. And I love this uncharity thing. It's great because I just think that, that's what we see playing around all around us, is people coming to the table with this defensive, presumptuous, like, I think I know because I know that you are carrying this flag or that you're a bad faith actor, you also think these other things. And what I'm all about is like, what do you actually think? And taking things a little bit at face value. I try not to be, I don't want to be naive, but I think like we should actually put out to the public what people actually said. if it requires some contextualization, that's an important function too. But I'm constantly just stripping out judgment words, which are as simple as just and only. Like, literally, you know, in a poll, only 3%, blah, blah, blah. It's like, why are you deciding whether that's a little or a lot? Like, maybe the expectation, I mean, I don't know. I was dealing with this poll this morning of college students, and, you know, it's kind of a strange poll, and our writer points out that it suggests some kind of incoherence in the world's view, which I suppose maybe isn't unique to college students, but also not to college students of this era. Anyway, it's like 83% say Israel has a right to exist. 46% say they agree with the statement from the river to the sea. 10% say only 10%, he said only 10% say they think it's okay for Zionists to be blocked from certain spaces on campus. And I'm like, only? Maybe that's a lot, you know? So yeah, just try to not bring your bias or your point of view to the interaction that you're having with someone who disagrees with you. And then what they say might be more or less charitable, I suppose.
Are you out there looking for these perspectives? Like, do you solicit them, or do you sort of take what comes in and make editorial choices from there?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. I mean, we get a lot of stuff over the transom, and we have some set, particularly with the opinion space, we have some set people who we go to, you know, we're in a relationship with, and they write for us all the time. We are always looking at social media to see if somebody has posted something that could be developed into more of an argument. And we're always trying to, we often, on big things, we really want to make sure we have multiple perspectives. So 2 days ago, the opinion editor was talking about a potential story written by a leftist writer, potential argument off of what was going on with Biden and the weapons suspension and then the resumption. And I was like, okay, great, but like, why don't we also ask Michael Oren to write a piece? He's the former ambassador to Washington and military historian. So sometimes it's very actively like seeking out two perspectives, multiple perspectives. On the campus thing, it's been a really interesting situation because last fall, right after October 7th, we were on top of this campus eruption in protests and crackdowns. We broke a lot of stories there, and after, it was very surprising to, I think, everybody. In addition to the IDF's intelligence failure that led to the vulnerability on October 7th, I think we had an intelligence failure of not really understanding how much the discourse around Israel had changed on college campuses. So we were all surprised a little bit in October. So we sent a bunch of reporters out to campuses, and we published a piece right around October 31st or November 1st that was like, what it's really like to be Jewish on campus right now. And I'm happy to say that article just won Religion Story of the Year or something from Religion News Association. Anyway, we were going to do it again in late April. We're like, what's it like now? Like, how's the year been? Well, then all this happened. So we're very well positioned in a weird way because we had 12 reporters on 12 campuses kind of reporting it out and then covering the protests. So in this case, we had that plus the opinions. We've been publishing and are continuing to publish a bunch of really thoughtful, in-depth pieces about individual students who are in different places around the protests. And that, I think, has been also adding to it. So we did seek it out in that way. Sure. But yeah, we're trying to tell, you know, it's always challenging for us as a small little organization. I have about 16 journalists working versus the New York Times is 1,700. Right. When our story becomes the story, now everybody's covering the main Jewish story, and that's always challenging. It's exciting, but it's also challenging. So I think we were well positioned to say, okay, people are going to get their news of basically what happened at Columbia overnight from other sources. We're going to try to zag a bit and go a little deeper and showcase those different perspectives.
Sure, interesting. It's such an interesting parallel to me between the journalism and some of the stuff that's happening on campus. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the independence of the forward. So your website says that your news judgment is made independently and not on the basis of donor support. And one big thing that's happening on college campuses is, you know, how much influence should these big donors have? They're understandably influential, but at least the forward says that it won't allow donors to shape its coverage or editorial judgment. Do you see a little bit of a parallel there in terms of the conversation around, who gets to make these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. So the way I think about this, the Forward, we have a really hard, we don't have a paywall, but we have a very hard wall between the donors, the board, the business side in general, and our editorial decision-making process. They don't get to contribute to the editorial decision-making process. I'm a pretty transparent, open person, so I like being in conversation with donors and board members, but I just treat them like any other reader. I mean, I also answer reader email, so it's like if you are a board member and you have a story idea and you send me an email, great. But like literally this week, I had a member of our broad advisory board who's a donor send in a potential op-ed pitch, and I forwarded it to the op-ed editor and said, this person is a member of the Forward Association, which you should not consider in your decision-making process, but if we run it, you need to disclose. Sure. So that's how it works for us. I think, though, I guess I have two thoughts about this parallel question. I mean, one is, look, withholding donations or giving donations is an important part of political speech, or at least according to the Supreme Court, sure, right? Sure. So if donors want to withhold their donations from a university or do like a $1 campaign to send a message to the university, that is clearly like okay. That is clearly part of the process. But I think that donors to universities and donors to nonprofit newsrooms, you need to think about, like, make sure that what you think you're donating to is what you're actually donating to. So sometimes people want to give us money to do a thing that is not what journalism is about. They want to give us money to protect Jewish students on campuses. And I'm like, I can try to make you an argument of why a better informed public will be good for Jewish students on college. I think it will be. Yeah. But, if what you really want, I can't promise you that the outcome is that, or is like, this used to happen I remember at the New York Times, some donor wanted us to do something for environmental this or that. It's like, we can take your money to cover the environment or the debate around climate change, but not to promote a certain perspective. And so we really want donors who will, and we really want donors, so if you'd like to donate to the Forward, you can do it at forward.com/donate. We are a reader-supported nonprofit with a lot of needs. But anyway, we want donors who actually believe in the thing we're doing, which is independent journalism and a platform for civil discourse. And I think that, I am not a wealthy person, of the things I give, Yale seems to be the thing that least needs my money, so I do not give a lot of money to Yale. But if I did, and by a lot I mean none, but anyway, if I was going to give money to them, it would be about, because what is the vision for a liberal arts college or a research university? My view, and I think what most university people who run them are doing, is trying to create an environment that's about inquiry and research and discourse and diversity and progress and science and letters and whatever. So it's like, probably they take money from people who don't actually think that through very well. They're like, I actually just want my name on this building or whatever. And they don't. But so you should know what you're donating to. And if what you want to donate for, if it's the thing that you most want to do in the world is advocate for a particular position around Israel and Palestine, maybe the university is not the right place for your money, because there's lots of nonprofits doing that thing, and you should find the one that matches your interests. But people want to support journalism. They should know that journalism is about inquiry and open-mindedness and broad discourse. At least our version of it is.
Great.
That was forward.com/donate. No. Anyway.
I think this will be my final question before we get into the Q&A, and I'll read something just prior to the Q&A. But for any young journalists, student journalists in the audience or listening, or who will later listen to this, do you have any advice for them in terms of covering controversial topics, especially potentially topics that they might have a particular view on?
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to say that I've been blown away by a lot of the student journalism covering these protests. The kids at the Columbia Spectator have gotten, I shouldn't call them kids, The journalist at the Columbia Spectator and also at the radio station there, whose call letters I will mess up if I try to remember them, have gotten a lot of attention. They've been doing amazing, amazing work. We just hired one of the Spectator reporters as a summer intern. I'm very excited about that. I also have written about the students at the Yale Daily News who have been covering protests, and I really admire them, and I think you should read their work directly, although it's also now been in a lot of mainstream publications. Yeah, my first advice, the way you asked the question is interesting, Andy. You said, for covering controversial topics, especially if they have a strong view on the topic. And my first advice is don't have a strong view. And I know people laugh when I say that, but it's like, when I was covering politics in the 2004 presidential campaign, I remember people always asking me, like, is it hard for you to, like, suppress your view while you're covering this? And I was like, none of that has ever occurred. I'm so uninterested in my own view about any of this. That's why I'm a reporter. I am interested in 2004, I was trying to figure out what kind of president would Howard Dean, John Kerry make. I was covering the Democrats. That's my job, to tell you what other people think. What are their views? What are the voters saying about them? It's like, who had time to think about my... And I think that if you're a college student and you're interested in journalism, if you have a strong view, you should consider opinion journalism. But I think you should be a reporter if what your strong view is I really am, I want to figure out what's going on around me, and I want to understand it better and help explain it to people. If you have a strong political view on a topic, you should go cover something else. But if you, in terms of advice generally, if you don't have a strong view, and your view is curiosity, then I think my advice of covering conflict is really just to keep your eyes open and look around, and listen with empathy. And try to really hear what all the different constituencies are saying, and try to always think about who's being impacted by what. Nice and vague there. And also, the other piece of advice is, we are so lucky in journalism you can just do it. You can start and do it. I was at a middle school this morning. They have a 5th grade newspaper. You can blog. You can do a podcast. You can post infographics on social media, and you can also write for the Forward. We publish college students and even some high school students all the time. So it's so cool that, especially in the digital age, the barrier for entry, not just for readers but for contributors, is low. And do it. Practice.
Great. We are about to begin the audience Q&A. For our live stream and radio audience, or those just joining, I'm Andy Geronimo, director of the First Amendment Clinic at Case Western Reserve University School of Law, and I'm the moderator for today's conversation. Joining me here today is Jodi Rudoren, editor-in-chief of The Forward, talking about independent journalism in an era of polarization. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those joining via our live stream at cityclub.org or radio broadcast at 89.7 WKSU, Idea Stream Public Media. If you'd like to text a question for our speaker, please text it to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794, and City Club staff will try to work it into the program. May we have the first question, please?
Yes, one term that's become very loaded is the word Zionist. It means something very, very different to different people. What would be the most objective definition of a Zionist?
Let's start off with an easy one. Why not? Thank you. No, it's interesting. I wrote something about this a few weeks ago. I forget the guy's name, but he worked at the Pew Research Forum. He told me that I'd asked, what percentage of American Jews consider themselves Zionists, and how has it changed over time? And he's like, oh, we don't poll on that. Nobody asks that question because nobody knows what the word Zionist means. And I was like, well, that's really helpful, thanks. I think that I would, I'm going to say Zionism is the belief that Okay, Zionism is the belief that Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state, or that Jews have the right to have a nation state in their historic homeland that is Israel. I think that's the core definition. I was really moved by something that Deborah Lipstadt said sometime in the fall about that to be, the Zionist movement pre-state and post, it's very different to talk about what it means to be a Zionist 76 years after the establishment of the State of Israel versus the Zionist movement that was the campaign for the State of Israel, or the yearning for the State of Israel. And she said, so to be an anti-Zionist 76 years later is a question of sort of erasure of this existence of the state and what will we do with the people who live there, versus to be an anti-Zionist or a non-Zionist before the establishment of the State of Israel. And I think that's very important to remember, too. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
When Eric Fingerhut was here in December, he spoke briefly about the generational divide among Jews regarding support for the State of Israel. It's much stronger among older Jews than younger Jews, and something I've read many times since. Do you agree with that there is this generational divide? And if so, how do you navigate that with a readership that you said was 1/3 of your readers are under 35? Thank you.
Yeah, great question, generational divide. I mean, I think I'm 53, and my kids are 16 years old, but a lot of my friends and siblings and stuff have kids in college, and one of the, I think, most vexing things about, really, it's been for the last many years, but has been so intense this year, is people really struggling to speak to their own children, to their own grandchildren across, and some of the stories that have done the best on our site have been stories about people saying, like, here's how to talk about Israel at the Passover Seder or whatever. So yes, I agree there is a generational divide. I think the sources of that divide are many. And I think, one thing is, we are a long way, both time-wise and most importantly, I think sociologically, from a time when a safe haven for Jews seemed like a visceral, urgent need. So I think people growing up in 21st century America, where Jews are prosperous and welcomed everywhere, at least for now. No, I mean me. I might not be welcome here anymore. No, kidding. The concept of we need a refuge is distant. So that's one thing. I think a second thing is, Israel itself in 1967 and until very recently declared the occupation to be a temporary occupation of the West Bank and other territories. And it is difficult to see the occupation as temporary as it passes its 50-year mark and as we see settlements, et cetera. And I think a third strain is the strain that begat the If Not Now organization around the last Gaza war, which is the fact that the organized American Jewish community did not grapple with the complexity around Israel and its neighbors in my childhood, in my lifetime. And I think people who grew up in day schools or summer camps learning really a one-sided picture of Israel and then got to campuses and found that there was other people there and other narratives and more to know, were very angry about that. And I understand that. We grapple with the complexities of our own colonization history and our own civil rights history and all the things that are messed up about our country right this second. We talk to our kids about that openly, and I think the American Jewish leadership over generations made a big mistake and by the way, so did the Israeli leadership, in narrowing the sort of information flow and discourse. And I guess the fourth strain that we are seeing so intensely right now, and we have a young person at the microphone, so I'm gonna wrap it up, is this connection. And this is the thing I have the least sort of empathy or respect for, which is this way in which the Israel-Palestine issue has been kind of adopted and molded to this broader set of complaints and worldviews that have to do with police brutality and climate change and a very, I think, sort of simplistic or reductive view of the world into oppressed and oppressor, and that's all you need to know. And I think that when that gets applied to this particular situation, first of all, it is reductive, as I just said, but also it actually doesn't apply. I mean, the settler colonial framework does not make sense in the Holy Land. So those are my sort of explanations, guesses at what's going on. But I think that the generational divide is a serious thing that people are grappling with. I'll say one more thing, which is to say the young Jews who are in the Gaza Solidarity encampments, as well as those who are in pro-Israel counter-demonstrations, whatever, like all of those people are very, very engaged with their Jewishness and with Israel. And a while ago, we were really worried that people were not engaged, and they're engaged. And we should figure out what that means for the next generation.
Hello, I'm Eliana Gorman, and so since the Forward is a Jewish news network, how have you or the Forward dealt with anti-Semitism because of the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Like like have we been targeted with anti-Semitism?
Yes.
Yeah, a little. I mean, I think. I actually think it's a really good question. We are not, I would say, I'm going to answer it in two ways. Compared to my time at the New York Times, when, you know, everybody around the whole debate was really interested in everything that we were saying. So the entire pro-Palestinian movement was equally interested in what we were doing as the pro-Israel movement. So I really got all the feedback from all the sides, including, I would say, some pretty anti-Semitic, because I happen to be Jewish, and also because the New York Times is wrongly perceived as a Jewish publication by some New Yorkers, some anti-Semitic vitriol there. The truth is, like, most of the kind of Palestine movement is like not that interested in the Forward. So the Jewish left is very interested in us. So I think what I actually get most now is a sort of accusations from the right that we are self-hating Jews or capos or whatever. But I think it's a minor thing. I don't think that we get targeted. And we get, you know, it's funny, right after October 7th, this is not funny, but right after October 7th, there was a number of Jewish websites that were hacked. And, you know, it sort of slowed us down, and we were hacked. I was joking that I wish they'd, you know, taken red ink and written on our homepage some nasty slogan so we could have gotten more attention out of being hacked, so people would know. But mostly I would say it's not a big problem. It's a good question, not a big problem.
You mentioned earlier that in October you've gone from having a paywall to having no paywall, and everybody was applauding, which is great because people love things for free. But as a publisher myself, and I'm wondering how that's worked out for you as somebody who needs to pay the bills.
Thank you for that question. So we were planning to transition from being a subscription organization with a paywall to being a membership organization without a paywall, sort of on the model of like NPR. We were planning on doing this before October 7th. The date was actually December 7th, I think. And we were doing it for two big reasons. The first was just mission. We just believe that journalism is nonprofit journalism, independent journalism is a pillar of our democracy, and in order for it to function that way, you need to have universal access for everyone. We also think that in the Jewish world, since engagement is a challenge, we need to have no barrier to entry. So that was the mission reason. There was also a business reason. We were doing fine, we had managed to maintain a lot of our print subscribers as we transitioned to digital, but it seemed clear to me that our growth opportunity was only going to be if we took the paywall down. So from a business perspective, that we had more potential to grow, to A, get more people to read us and then give us money because they appreciate what we're doing, to B, get the people who were paying us subscriptions to potentially pay us more because they appreciated what we were doing, and we would give them incentives to have not just one payment but many. And 3, that major donors who already were supporting us would actually up their gifts in order to provide access because of the mission reasons. So, so this is a business decision as much as a philosophy. And we, it was fortuitous that we were making this change at a time in which people really, really needed the thing we were doing. And then we also had a higher profile because of that. So it is going very well. Thank you for asking. But we always need more members. And
do you have that link again?
Yeah, it's forward.com/donate. And if you'd like to become a recurring member, so that anyway, yeah. But I think I really, really believe journalism is in a really bad place. We have half the working journalists we did 15 years ago. A quarter of local publications have shut down. It is a serious, serious crisis. And the most promising thing that is happening in terms of the business model is the nonprofit business model, which includes free access and investment by people like those in this room and like those listening to NPR right now, who understand that in order to have institutions like the City Club, you have to show up and you have to contribute. And I didn't come up with this, but one of the pioneers of the nonprofit news industry describes it as like a healthy community needs an independent news source the way they need a public library or the opera or the City Club. And we think of ourselves as that for the community called American Jews, which of course is many communities.
Hello, my name is Kyle. I'm a student at MC Square STEM High School, and I wanted to know, does the Forward have anything for teenage or young adult Jewish people considering that anti-Semitism is rising in culture, not just in, with, Free Palestine and stuff like that, but more like even with people like Kanye West who expressed anti-Semitism. So, yeah.
Thank you for the question. So when I came to the Forward in 2019, it was like this historic rise in anti-Semitic attacks in Brooklyn, and there was this huge march in New York in January of 2020. And then in the fall of 22, we had Kanye and then Kyrie Irving, and it was like we had this huge surge in coverage and audience, and it's like, who even could have imagined it would be? So you're right, there's a lot going on. When you say, do we have anything for young people? The answer is we have journalism. We really do try to both to cover young people and to do our coverage in language that works for young people. We are on all the platforms and very active on Instagram, which is where my young people that I live with get a lot of their news. We've been experimenting on TikTok, which is also where my young people get their news. And we are just getting off the ground, I'm not sure if this is what you mean, but I'll mention it anyway, a college ambassadors program where we are enlisting students across college campuses who are interested in the things we're interested in to help promote our journalism on their campuses, either by sharing our articles in their Hillel or Chabad or student newspaper websites, and also to be our sort of eyes and ears and help us understand more about their perspective and give us ideas of what we should be covering or how we should be covering it. So that is just getting up and running. And if people are interested, they can email me. You can find my email on the website.
Hi, good afternoon. I was intrigued at your first piece of advice to aspiring journalists not having strong views. What's your perspective on those Times reporters who went public pushing back against how the Times was covering certain areas? Usually, I mean, my father was in the newspaper business, a reporter for 50 years, so I always heard those, but it was internal, the disputes, and now they're going public. They're posting it on social media.
I think I'm not sure which thing you're talking about. Do you know more specifics?
The Times reporter who, I think he leaked something and he got fired for it. And then there were other reporters who spoke up on social media saying, we don't agree with the way the Times is approaching various news. So in terms of your reporters, you know, if they were to come up and say, we don't think this is the right direction, but then they go public with that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I guess I have two levels of answers of this. I grew up at the New York Times. I often get asked about, you know, the New York Times' coverage of this conflict, and I have lots of thoughts, but it's also, you know, you're talking about my family, so I'm not necessarily objective about that. But my policies at the Forward are actually formed from my experience at the New York Times, which is that, so journalists in both places are not allowed to, are not allowed to express political opinions either on what they're covering or anything else that the organization covers, other than those who work in the opinion department. So that's one thing, and that's you know, there's real conflicts and there are perceptions of conflicts, and they're equally important. Even if you have no conflict, people perceiving you as having a conflict of interest undermines the credibility of the publication. The trust in media is eroding enough on its own. We don't need to help it along. So the privilege of working at the New York Times does involve the responsibility to keep your political opinions to yourself. Full stop. Number two, I don't think it's good professional behavior to talk crap about your employer in public. I think that the New York Times, well, let's not. At the Forward, I encourage people to talk about whatever they think is wrong with the Forward to me, anytime they want. But I don't want them talking about it on social media. I don't think that's healthy. And you don't have to work at the New York Times or work at the Forward. There's plenty of people criticizing the New York Times on social media all the time. And if you want to be one of them, good luck. But I don't know that you have to, like, do it for, I don't know. I think that if you work at the New York Times, you should try to criticize the New York Times, take your issues up with your boss or with the many other forums that they have within the system for complaints. And I think that when you get to the point where you can't hold back your critiques of your employer, it might be time for you to get a new job.
When I first started teaching broadcast communication, like back in the early 1980s, there was a basic thought that broadcast communication was a scarce commodity, only so many frequencies out there. So we were governed at that time by the Communications Act of 1934, which said that a owner could only own 7 radio, 7 FM, 7 TV stations. Plus, there was another law or ruling that said you had to give equal time. You know, if you're presenting one view, you have to present the other view. Today, there's no more scarcity because of cable and satellite. There's plenty of sources. But the whole concept of equal time has gone away. And corporations can buy hundreds of radio stations, and if they want to put a conservative view or a liberal view, they can just saturate the airwaves with it. And I thought when they moved from the Communications Act of 1934 to what ended up in the 1990s, you know, we don't have that equal time. People are in their own silos. Is it too? Yeah. Okay. So I just was wondering, could equal time ever come back so people could get out of their silos?
I mean, I think the silos are really the problem, right? I think it is, you know, it is a devastating situation for our democracy that sources of information and discourse have become so polarized and siloed. That is almost everything that I see that's wrong today, this is a contributing factor. So I don't know how to answer the equal time portion, but I can't say enough about, like, get out of your bubble. You know, find a way to get out of your bubble, change your algorithm, follow people you disagree with, and look at things that upset you so that you will then see more range of things. I think that, you know, I don't want to live in that bubble. I don't want my kids to live in that bubble, and so we got to break the social media bubbles as well. I think that, you know, and it is mostly about social media, but it's also, of course, about the media. And, you know, I am certainly supportive of the right of anybody to start any publication they want. But it is critically important for us as consumers to distinguish between advocacy journalism and independent journalism that is broad-minded and is trying to be a platform for civil discourse. And, you know, you guys know this. The City Club is a place where lots of different people come on stage. There are other organizations where only certain kinds of people come on stage. And I just don't mistake what you're seeing in or on a source that is obviously political advocacy for journalism. Sometimes it comes in the form of journalism, but it's not.
Very briefly, I feel obligated to say that there would be First Amendment problems with requiring that equal time, but for the broadcast scarcity. So for a government rule to come say, notwithstanding that the lack of scarcity now, you must cover these things, raises serious editorial control problems of the kinds we work in the clinic.
And I know we're like out of time, but right, here's the big change since 1934. I know we're out of time, but I don't care. It's on you, right? It used to be the broadcaster's responsibility, and now it's on us to be discerning consumers of news and information.
Thank you. Rudoren and Andrew Geronimo for joining us at the City Club today. Forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like you. You can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech at cityclub.org. Today's forum is the Samuel O. Friedlander Memorial Forum on Free Speech. Mr. Friedlander was a member of the City Club most of his life, serving as president in 1962 during the City Club's 50th anniversary year. This forum is also the annual WCLV Forum endowed by Robert and Jean Conrad, which recognizes the extraordinary relationship between a Cleveland radio station and the City Club of Cleveland, and celebrates their mutual respect for the fundamental importance of free speech. We appreciate Bob and Jean's ongoing support of the City Club. Please join me in welcoming students joining us from MC Squared STEM High School. We'd also like to welcome guests at the tables hosted by the First Amendment Clinic at the Case Western Reserve University School of Law and the Jewish Federation of Cleveland. Up next at the City Club, 8-time Grammy winner Terrence Blanchard will join us. He is a trumpeter, a pianist, and got his start working on film scores by Spike Lee. As part of his participation in the Cleveland Orchestra's Mandel Humanities Festival, he'll speak here on May 21st. Former BET producer Jeff Johnson will moderate that conversation. Then on Thursday, May 30th, we celebrate another phenom, this time Morel McCain, a Glenville native and boxer who will be the only Olympian in Ohio heading to Paris for the 2024 Olympic Games. You can get your tickets for those events and more at cityclub.org. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you to our members and friends of the City Club. I'm Jill Ziman, and this forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.